justify your decision, Chris, and tell us what you want us to do.
So it feels like a couple of years ago, it was probably about 15 years ago, I went to a poetry night where they had a thing, a section of the night called Dead Poet Society, where all the performing poets had to go up and perform a poem by an ex-poet, and the audience then got to vote on which was their favorite afterwards. It was really interesting to see what these poets would bring. And I'm not suggesting there should be any sort of competitive element to this. It just feels like a nice way to kind of reveal something about where we come from without having to say it ourselves. Because I mean, I don't know about the others, but that's definitely why I write poetry, is to not have to talk about myself in any great length. So I don't know which order you want to do this.
Can I just confess my poet's not dead?
Neither's mine, don't worry.
Oh,
yeah.
Would you like to go first, Chris? If it was
okay, sure. So the poem I have selected is by Brian Patton, and it is called One Another's Light. I do not know what brought me here, away from where I've hardly ever been, and now I'm never likely to go again. Faces are lost, and places past at which I could have stopped, and stopping, been glad enough. Some faces left a mark, and I on them might have wrought some kind of charm or spell to make their futures work, but it's hard to guess how one person on another works an influence. We pass, and lit briefly by one another's light, hope the way we go is right. Part of the reason I chose that was because in the last week I lost a very good friend who had much more influence on me at a really important stage of my life than I think they realized, and I certainly realized at the time. And that sense that when we encounter people, we share our light with them and they share their light with us, I think is quite central to the way I think about human connection, spiritual connection, all sorts of aspects of life. And it just feels like something that never gets lost. Even if we forget it's there, it's still there. So that is my justification for choosing Brian Patton.
That is a lovely sentiment. It's always interesting to hear other poems. So, Vicky, would you like to go next with your?
Yes. This is a poem by Naomi Shihab Nye. I'm not even sure if I'm saying her name correctly. She is a very well-known and revered poet, and I confess I hadn't heard of her until about a year ago or a year and a half ago. And I feel incredibly grateful to the person who said, oh, have you heard of this person's work? I think you'd like it. Because they're right, her work is amazing. If you've also not come across her before, she's from the States, and she's half Palestinian, half American. And so she writes quite a lot about Arab culture, and her work is just beautiful. So this poem is called Red Brocade. The Arabs used to say, when a stranger appears at your door, feed him for 3 days before asking who he is, where he's from, where he's headed. That way he'll have strength enough to answer, or by then you'll be such good friends you don't care. Let's go back to that. Rice? Pine nuts? Here, take the red brocade pillow. My child will serve water to your horse. No, I was not busy when you came. I was not preparing to be busy. That's the armor everyone put on, to pretend they had a purpose in the world. I refuse to be claimed. Your plate is waiting. We will snip fresh mint into your tea. and I wanted to share it because I love the generosity of the poem, the kind of call to hospitality and kindness, and I find that quite challenging, but oh, I love it. I feel like it kind of calls something out that I want to be like. That's why I chose it.
Thank you. And Dad?
Yeah, it's a really hard thing to have been asked to do this. I found this harder than choosing any of my own poems. It was how do you select something from this huge wellspring of poetry and find something that was significant and meaningful. So I went through. I've had so many different choices as this week since we kind of hit on that idea, or Chris suggested that idea. Has unfolded, and I've been through, well, you know, I could maybe choose something from the poetry that brought me towards poetry, which is actually probably song lyrics. So I was thinking, well, maybe something by Bob Dylan or Bruce Cockburn would probably have been the one that I would obviously choose, because his writing was kind of my entry probably into poetry as much as poetry itself was. But then I thought, no, I should choose something really highbrow to make myself look clever. But I don't know any of that stuff, so that choice was out entirely. And then I remembered, I've been doing some poetry workshops of late, and I usually take along a selection of poems, and one of them is this poem, which is the first poem I think I could ever remember reading as a kid, or having read to me at primary school. And it's by someone called Irene Rutherford MacLeod, who's somebody that I had never heard of and never heard since. I did a deep dive on Tinternet to see if I could find out who she was. She was she published one book of poetry, just one, sometime in the 1920s or 30s. She was somehow connected to, I believe she was the mother of the person who Christopher Robin was based on. So that's as far as I can get about her. But she wrote these astonishing poems, and quite why there aren't 20 or 30 of her books, probably because she was a woman at a time when men were the ones whose poetry was being listened to. Maybe you could argue that's still the case. But anyway, this is a song which totally resonated with me as a kid, for reasons which I'm not going to explain, other than to say I was a bit of an outsider. I'm a lean dog, a keen dog, a wild dog, and alone. I'm a rough dog, a tough dog, hunting on my own. I'm a bad dog, a mad dog, teasing silly sheep. I love to sit and bathe the moon and keep fat souls from sleep. I'll never be a lap dog licking dirty feet, a sleek dog, a meek dog cringing for my meat. Not for me the fireside, the well-filled plate, but shut door and sharp stone and cuff and kick and hate. Not for me the other dogs running by my side. Some have run a short while, but none of them would bide. Oh, mine is still the lone trail, the hard trail, the best. Wide wind and wild stars, and hunger of the quest.
Great. It was interesting to hear the different styles that you chose to read of your own poems. Yeah. So what next? Did you want another theme or a theme from the theme generator? Drum roll, please. Next up we have slow. Okay. Chris, would you like to go first with this one? Oh, and in the meantime, there was a question there. I think that's maybe for you, Dad. What was the poet's name again? Very Kipling-esque.
Irene Rutherford MacLeod. Double barrel name. So she was probably posh.
What did you say the theme was again?
Slow.
Slow. Was that on our list? Because I haven't got one for slow.
I think
Shall I redraw?
No, it's silence. Silence.
Silence. Oh, okay, I can do
Yeah.
that.
It
The poem
definitely
is-
says slow.
The poem I've chosen is called Slow.
Ah, dyslexic brain. Silence.
Okay, I can do that. So, yes, so this is a poem I wrote, oh goodness, years ago, and just left in a notebook until last week. I did a theology course oh goodness, it must have been 6 years ago at least now. And in the retreat center that we did lots of our weekend meetings, there was an oratory, one of those, however you say it, that nobody seemed to know was there. Nobody used it. And it wasn't until we had a specific weekend on kind of spirituality, it was called. So we looked at meditation as well as everything else. We used it then. And that was the only time in the 2 years I was doing the course that we ever used that room. And to me, it felt like such a waste and such a kind of a missing piece of what we were doing, that here was this chance to kind of be in a still, quiet place and connect with something that we weren't using. And it was all about words and tradition, which I personally found a bit frustrating. So I would finish my meal slightly earlier and run off to find some quiet space. And this is the poem that I wrote after the first weekend where I did it. It's called Oratory. The closed door seals my silence. I circle before settling on a place. Rummage gently, slow my breath, and the sound haze slowly peels away until I am weightless, nowhere but closer.
Lovely. Yeah, these are also so beautiful. Vicky, would you like to read your silence? This sounds a contradictory sentence.
Yes. After silence, can I ask a question, Emily?
Yes, of course.
Oh, it's thank you.
My poem is called What Comes from Silence, which I think was inspired by a line from a Wendell Berry poem a few years ago. I sat long, the bleached and broken branch, sacred as any stiff-backed pew. Stillness was learned as dusk became a gauzy skyrobe of constellations. I expected silence to be peace, some sort of hard-earned joy, but instead I wept as silence offered me my own star-shrouded heart.
Oh, sweet. And Dad, silence.
I remember that poem from the book. I think that was one of my favorites. Yes, that's beautiful, beautiful. I'm going to read a poem, another lockdown poem. I mentioned the 4 years of writing miserable, angry poems during the Trump and our own mini Trump years. But actually, the lockdown, as well as being shadowed by people dying, including 2 of my close family, it was also the time when we all stopped. And I actually have another poem I wrote about that time called The Great Silence, because it was still. I mean, like most silences in nature, it's never totally silent, is it? There's always a busyness or a different kind of thing happening. But both of those poems that my colleagues there just read almost adventure in the same kind of area, that silence is a place where things happen, a place back to that mystic thing, a place of connection. So this is called slow, not silence. Slow like a river through the roots of ancient trees. Slow like sails. Slow like a meadow in a wind that flows forever. Slow like the sea. Slow as the tear that stains an unlined cheek. Slow like Sunday. Slow like stories waiting to be told. Slow like sunshine. Slow like a worm moving deep in the virgin soil. Slow like a friend. Slow like a swallow high in new blue sky. Slow like religion. Slow like the way that lichen grows on rock. Slow like rot. Slow like the glacial flow of ancient ice. Slow like a poem. Slow like a thought on a rainy day. Slow like pain. Slow like the heartbeat of elephant or whale. Slow like a snail. Slow like the summer when we were young. Slow like good news. Slow like the wait for a baby to be born. Slow like God.
I do like that one. So I think, Nicola, you had a question you wanted to ask.
Well, in a way, of course, it's hard to break that silence of listening and absorbing. My question to all three poets is how do you feel about, how do you approach the fact that poems are words on a printed, on a piece of paper, words on a piece of paper for somebody to read. And a poem is also words that you read. And when you read them in the way you wish them to be heard, and in the way that sounds right and meaningful to you. And I wonder, as you write the poems, do you ever worry that somebody, a reader or a listener, might not get it? You know, do you ever think, maybe I should use some punctuation merely to force it home, the message, or to guide and lead? Or do you let the punctuation fly away? Or, you know, what feelings do you have about that? Words on paper and words spoken out into the air, performed.
I suppose from my point of view, I am more comfortable with the words being on the paper than I am reading them. But as I'm writing them, I'm speaking them in my head. So what I tend to find is that I'm putting far too many punctuation marks. In fact, in editing books, which thankfully Michaela's really good at helping me with editing my poetry, we take out virtually all of the punctuation marks because they come in like scattergun, because I'm trying to kind of convey on the page the way that the words sound in my head. I don't think I'm not worried particularly about people. I don't know what other people think about this, and or other ones of you who are poets. I know a lot of you who are part of this are as well. I don't really mind people not getting my poetry, and it comes back to that thing of transcendence and mysticism, that words that find us will be words that need to find us. So Michaela uses a lot of my words in ceramics, and actually she will often put a totally different meaning into the way she uses those words than what I meant. And I think that's fine. You know, that's sometimes it goes, oh no, that's not what that's about. But for the most part, that's the nature of poetry. You know, there's the creating of it, and the almost like the opening of a vein of the poet doing that in the first place. Then there's the setting it free, and where it ends up and how useful it is for other people is that's not the business of the poet. That's the business of the great spirit of all things. Let's leave that to him or her.
I would say from my end, the speaking and the words on the page are sort of come hand in hand to me. I don't often read in this way, but I have to read it out loud when I'm writing it, because it's the only way in my head that I can understand whether it works for what I'm trying to do. One of the most frustrating things I find is when I type something into Microsoft Word, for example, and it automatically puts every new line, starts every new line with a capital letter, because that's not how I'm thinking it, and that's not how I want to see it on the page. It's sort of so I do think quite carefully about how it looks on the page, but also it has to work when I say it out loud. Otherwise, I don't feel like it's conveying what I want it to carry. And in terms of whether someone gets it, I think my aim is, in the back of my head, is if one person understands what I mean, then I've achieved the purpose. If someone understands something completely different to them, fine, that's good too. As long as they're finding something worthwhile in it, then I'm more than happy.
I don't often think about reading my poems aloud, like to people when I'm writing them, but I do read them aloud to myself, because I think it's a really it's like an editing tool, isn't it? You can kind of hear how words work together, or if you find that you're tripping up as you're saying them, it sort of sometimes is a clue that maybe there's something just not quite fitting or whatever. But so I had it was quite an uncomfortable experience about this time last year, I think. I did these online poetry workshops, and it was like a really fantastic thing to take part in. And, you know, we'd have like a little bit of input, and then we'd all get sent off with some writing prompts to go and work on a certain theme. And it was like quite profound, the sorts of themes that we were looking at. And I wrote this poem that really came from quite a vulnerable place in my heart. And then, you know, we were invited to share them in this. I think we've been divided into 2 or 3 smaller groups in the workshop. So there was maybe only like 4 or 5 of us and one of the facilitators in the group. It wasn't like massive. And so I read this poem that was like coming from this really precious place inside me that I'd not really articulated before. And this guy that was in, like, another person in the workshop was like, so when you're saying coming, that's sexual, right? And I'm like, no, and I was horrified. I just like, it was about as far from that kind of thing as you could possibly get. And that's not to say that there's anything wrong with poetry of that nature, but that was not my meaning, and I just was absolutely appalled. But it was also a really good insight that actually a word that just seems to be one thing to you can be, you know, have a multiplicity of meanings to other people. I redrafted that poem and wrote something that used a different word that meant the same thing but would not suggest anything else, and I felt a lot more comfortable with that. So whilst, like, honestly, it took me about a week to recover from that comment, but it ultimately was very helpful. So I do think about that, and I learned a lot from that experience in that workshop. I don't know if that answers your question, Nicola.
Go in with a pseudonym at all times, you know.
Yes.
Well, I think, but my question was partly around, have you tried taking any of your poems and saying to somebody else, now please read my poem, and see how they work through the lines, whether they make the pauses at the places where you do, or whether the length of the pauses is as long as you might choose to give. That's and where you're not thinking about performance, is the performance something that entertains, although it's wonderful when it does, isn't it, actually? But whether it breathes through the lines in the way you hear it in your...
I think my answer to that, Nicola, is that yes, I have, and it almost always is difficult because people don't breathe their way through. And I think perhaps if somebody knew the poem really well, but they're not ever going to have that inner voice of the poem in the way that you would. So that actually, I've always found that quite difficult. You almost have to kind of crunch up and just let it be what it needs to be, which
yes.
is interesting.
Thank you.
No, thank you very much. I'm just looking at the time and realizing that we are almost done with our target time. Have we got time to squeeze in one more poem round though? Because it feels like it'd be really nice to. And I want to. Is Emily still there? I want to kind of circumvent the random selector, Emily, and suggest that we end with some hope. Is that what you've drawn in? You're muted, dear. You're muted.
So I am. I thought that the top one I drew for a second was hope, so it's meant to be, but it actually says healing. I just read the H.
Oh well,
so
it's
hope it is.
enough.
Yeah.
So let's end with some hope.
Fab. Vicky, have you got your shuffling papers? Chris, are you ready?
Sorry, are you asking me to go first? Because I've been first the last 2 rounds. I don't want to dominate.
Vicky?
That's what the random generator demanded, Chris.
Oh, is it? Well, I'll do it if you want.
No, you're all right. Vicky, are you ready?
I'll go first. I'm feeling like I need to be, I'm channeling my inner female Doctor Who, and I need to, I'll lead the way. This is a poem called Yielding. I can tell you only this, stranger, when I stand on the slant lane, hand on hip, catching ragged purple breath, when I watch the cloud-wrecked sky offer a silent sacrament of peach, copper, lilac, grey, and I receive it on the storm-broken altar of the slate grey tree line. That is when something black bursts, breaks, blue eggshell yielding to thumb, berry splits purple between lips. That is the crack wide enough to walk through new.
Oh, this is a good choice of theme to end with, I think, Dad. Have you got your hopeful poem ready?
Yeah, that poem was the one that I think you posted on Instagram or something last week. Oh, it got me straight away, and it got me again. It's the problem with one reading, you almost want to hear it again, don't you? But you're going to have to just wait for Vicky's next book, because I think that's a recent one, isn't it, Vicky? Yes. Right. Well, I'm going to read you a poem called The Laugh. which makes another nod to who's the kind of the farming poet that Vicky mentioned earlier. Can't remember his name. Never mind. You may recognise the reference when I read it.
Wendell Berry. Is that
Thank you. Wendell Berry. Him. When you feel despair at the state of the world, do something small. Ignore those voices without or deep within calling you fool for refusing tyrannical logic imposed by cynical wisdom. Then do it anyway. When you feel broken by all the cruelty the world contains, reach out, remembering that humanity can only be collectively encountered. Allow empathy to be an umbilical conduit for a nutrient called kindness. What else are we for? When overwhelmed by the size of the mountain, walk slower. Save breath for conversation, for miles pass fast in company. Then, as words fade, listen for the fat laugh deep down in the belly of all that is still becoming.
Lovely. And Chris?
Yeah. The mine's another relatively new one, so I'm wondering whether or not I need to follow it with one from my book just to just to get one in before we finish. But this is sort of I associate hope with optimism sometimes, and this is about the most optimistic person I know. It's called Fossil. He wants to show me another fossil, chasing off down the tide line to find where his eye was caught, hooting cheerfully as he does. I think of other times he's done this. Chunks of tarmac on pavements, chips of concrete slab between trees, ornamental garden pebbles. I have no expectation that his find will be ancient, but it will be precious. And I am still amazed by the glisten, the patterns he can see in a rounded, weathered, C-shaped piece of slate. At the heart he feels once beat inside the irregular marks scored onto the edges.
That is very, very beautiful, Chris. That is from Post-it Poems, isn't it?
Not no.
No?
I wrote it about 2 months ago.
It sounded familiar. I must have read it somewhere then, I'm guessing.
Mm.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for giving us these few moments to kind of indulge us in reading our poems. It's been absolutely lovely to do that, and so good to do it in company, not just your company, but especially Chris's and Vicky's as well. So thank you, everyone. I think we will probably always, anybody any comments? I see Michaela has her hand up.
Yeah, I'm sure lots of people would want to say the same. It's just been absolutely beautiful. Thank you. So it just makes you go, just makes you stop. It's lovely. But I also wanted to give a very quick plug to something that the Hay Festival are doing. I think it's next week or this week. There's a book festival in Ukraine, in Lviv, which is LVIV, Lviv Festival. And they're giving, you can register for free to kind of check in online with what's happening at the book festival, and they just want as many people as possible to do it to show some solidarity and support with the writers and poets there. So I just thought I'd let you all know.
Thank you.
But back to tonight, it's been an absolute gift. Thank you.
Well, thanks everyone. And I think we'll do that thing of ending the meeting rather than that awful thing where you all creep away, wondering whether you've got to kind of. It's one of the other things we learned in lockdown, isn't it? That, you know, the ending of a Zoom meeting, you click on it and it hasn't quite gone. So we'll just say thank you, and I hope, you know, we'll do this again at some point, and we'll see some faces in other contexts, I'm sure. Anyway, so yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, poets.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.